Welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Rafael Carmona. I'm from the ICDR, the International Division of the AAA. And as you know, I help with our Young Practitioners Group, ICDR Young and International. I want to take a moment of your time before we actually begin to remind you that you can join as an ICDR Y&I associate. If you Google us ICDR Young and International, you will find our website. You'll be able to find registration forms in English and in Spanish, as well as recordings from all of our previous webinars. We also have a LinkedIn group, also called ICDR Young and International. You can look it up in LinkedIn and you can request to join. We will also be posting all of our updates there. And I want to also thank, first of all, of course, all of you for joining this webinar today, our panelists, as well as our co-sponsors, the ABA Forum on Construction Law, the Latin American Association of Construction Law, ALDEC, the Society of Construction Law North America, and Y Construction, Young International Construction Practitioners. And special thanks also to our board, and especially Zach Torres for leading the charge in organizing this webinar series. With that, don't want to take any more of your time. We've come here to hear about BIM, which is a very interesting topic. So Alonso, who's going to be our moderator for today, I give you the floor so that we can begin.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Rafa, for your words. And thank you, everyone, for being here today with us. We all hope you enjoy our webinar of today that has to do with BIM, standing for Building Information Modeling. Prior to the commencement of the webinar itself, allow me to share 3 short comments with you all. The first has to do with my token of appreciation towards the supporting organizations of this event, as Rafa has already mentioned. And second, of course, prior to the panelists talking today, I want you to get to know who they are and the background. So allow me to read the notes that I took about their credentials, because there are many, and I hope you find them useful in order to get to know more about BIM today, right? So I'm going to start with Jonathan Haag, who works at Tungsten Associates, a firm which he has founded. Jonathan is an expert with over 15 years of experience, and he's worked in engineering and construction projects, having advised clients during the execution of active projects and provided expert analysis and testimony in related disputes, such as under ICC arbitrations. As well, we've got today Michael Valo, who is a partner at Glahold Bowles, and Michael specializes in international construction arbitration and has also experience in dispute resolution boards. He has worked for owners, contractors, and engineers, and his work, as you can see, focuses on large-scale infrastructure projects. Also, we've got Sarah Keyte today. She works as Associate Technical Director at HKA. She is a chartered construction manager with more than 10 years of experience, and she specializes in BIM, information management, computer-aided design, and 4D modeling. Sarah is a certified user of Synchro Pro and evaluates whether BIM assets are compliant with their respective contract documents, standard, and BIM execution plans. As well, we've got Jeremy Glover, who is a partner at Fenwick Elliott, and he is also specialized in construction, energy, and engineering law. He advises on all aspects of projects, from initial procurement and strategic project advice to dispute avoidance and resolution. According to different legal guides, this note, and I quote, his spectacular knowledge of FIDIC. In line with it, and with BIM of today, Jeremy has written articles on the application of BIM in the FIDIC form of contract. Last but not least, myself, I am Alonso Mayordomo. I work at Estampa Abogados. We are a law firm specialized in arbitration and mainly on complex engineering and construction disputes. We do both counsel and arbitrators work, and today I'll be the moderator of this session. So again, my third comment right before the commencement of the webinar has to do with the flow that we have decided to come up with, because we are in a digital meeting today, And in order to be as dynamic as possible and to draw your attention, we will split the participation of the panelists in several of them. So they will be talking and jumping from one topic to another. I'll be addressing questions, and the point for us is that the audience is happy and can follow the track of the whole webinar, right? So having said that, I think it's clear the introduction of my panelists of the webinar of today. And I want to start from the outset, right? And despite it might be quite simple, I think it's important to get to know the first intricacies of this topic. And I'm going to address this first question to Jonathan. And it's going to be simple and straightforward. I hope you can let us know what you think, Jonathan, because what is BIM? What can you tell us? The floor is yours.
Thanks, Rafael and Alonso, for all those introductions. And I must admit, though, Alonso, you stole a little bit of my thunder. You already told them what BIM stands for. So I'll allow it for starters, since we're just on the first minute here. But BIM obviously is building information modeling. And that sounds very simple, but really what BIM captures is a whole lot more than just a model. I think in terms of the engineering and construction industry, 3D modeling has been around for quite a long time, since the 60s and 70s. And what BIM does is it takes that 3D modeling, which is already an evolution from 2D drawings and that sort of thing that have been so customary on engineering and construction projects over the years. And BIM takes that and starts adding more layers of information to that. So as you can see here, you're not just dealing with a model of the structure or the architecture on the outside that you'll see, or the mechanical engineering and plumbing aspects. You're bringing all those together in one place. From there, you're actually building on that. These models, the intent of BIM is to create a smart model that incorporates additional information on each of these components, so that you have not only the 3D representation of each component, but you can actually, click on a component and understand what's this material, what's the anticipated maintenance schedule. If I need a replacement or if I need maintenance, how do I go about getting those sorts of things taken care of? And so BIM is really, adding in information, adding in usability, and adding in utility to what historically has been, just a 3D model. Just a quick history lesson. A few may be interested, but I'll breeze through this just quickly. I mean, building information modeling has been generally around since the 1970s. It rose in recognition just a bit in the 1980s, as it was used on some projects at the London's Heathrow Airport. And so that's when, there was a bit of an uptick in recognition of BIM. But the term building information modeling really didn't, from my research, become kind of the customary term for this model technique until the early 2000s, when Autodesk, obviously well known in the engineering space, coined the term building information modeling with a white paper put together. I would say the reason why we're here and why we're talking about this today is because over the last, I'll say 5 to 10 years, we've seen another influx in the use of BIM in the engineering and construction space. I think this is due to a couple of different aspects in terms of it's a lot more accessible. What may have taken a whole computer or a dedicated computer or a dedicated computation machine can now be run on a laptop or in the cloud. As well, the cost of BIM and the vendors who offer BIM has decreased, making it more accessible to a larger set of users. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit about just the growth in the different areas around the world and who's using it. So I've pulled a couple of what I thought were pretty interesting charts from a report put together by the Dodge Construction Network. And what they did is they conducted research from October 2020 to March 2021. So this data is about 2 years old, so keep that in mind. And they polled employees in the architecture, design, engineering, construction, and consulting sectors that worked in these sectors, and got about 576 responses. And some of the majority were from users of BIM, but some were also from non-users. So I would say you have a pretty good cross section of industry here. So you can see here, based on, starting in this chart on the left, North America, based on the respondents, which I would note were strongly in North America, based on this data, were very early to adopt, with Japan and Scandinavia really, kind of getting more into it more recently. I would say in some ways, and Jeremy will probably, talk about this a bit more, I think in more recent years, Europe has really led the use of BIM and the adoption of BIM, and not just from a surface, but really, incorporating it into the projects and the execution of those projects. Next, you can see, the cross section. As I mentioned, this BIM can really be used throughout the life cycle of a project, but then also into the lifespan of the building or the asset that's being constructed. So, as I would have expected anyway, the design professionals, particularly architects who are combining and coordinating a lot of the different design aspects, were early to adopt this, BIM as a tool. I think contractors logically came in behind them, as they were able to use BIM to coordinate, different aspects in the field to prevent or resolve different issues that may occur, that Sarah's going to talk about in just a minute. And then kind of later to the game have been some of the engineering trades. I think some of that's probably due to the fact that engineers had more established tools like CAD, 3D CAD, that sort of thing, that were already available and being used for the engineering trades. And BIM, in some ways, was duplicative of that. So they've been, based on this data, later to adopt the BIM as a specific modeling tool. Like I said, obviously they've had different modeling available. What I think is interesting too, and I think indicative of the reason why this is a topic relevant for this group, is that across every single group of people that were part of this poll, everybody is forecasting that BIM will be increased in use over the next 2 to 3 years. And so I think, keeping in mind that this data is 2 to 3 years old, this is where we are now. All of these groups were saying we're going to be using it more, and here we are talking about it because it's being used more. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about how BIM's being used in projects and likewise in disputes.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I want to talk about how BIM can be used to avoid disputes. So most conversations around BIM are about preventing disputes. And to do that, having that intelligent 3D digital representation of a built asset, really useful for collaboration and communication. So when you're starting projects, having that visualization and being able to have conversations around the models, like the one in the middle of the screen, incredibly useful. So it gives you a consensus. When you're producing design information, the models can be used to produce drawings. And then if you change the models, the drawings are changed. So it helps you produce design information. Having worked for a contractor and developer, it's incredibly useful to give your clients visualizations and optioneering images so they can make informed decisions about how things are going to look, how things are going to feel. Clash detection is one of the best uses of BIM. So if you have building information models from, say, different design disciplines, you can get in a room, put your models together, and essentially digitally rehearse the project. So before you get on site and put spades in the ground, you can rehearse your project and make sure the design concept works and that the different design packages are actually coordinated. So this avoids disputes, obviously, because you've verified your information, you've checked it, and hopefully you've picked up any issues. The use of 4D is a really interesting application of BIM. So it's the combination of scheduling data and models, and using those two different, essentially, disciplines, your design and your program, you can look at how things are going to be built. And in my career, prior to joining the dispute world, my job was to put models together with programs and identify issues. So making sure everything was planned as well as we possibly could. 5D is looking at quantities and eventually cost. So using models, you can say compare different design options, say how much concrete is one design using over another, and think about the cost. And this is a really great tool for anticipating costs and estimating. The next application I want to talk about is offsite manufacturing. So if you can modularize parts of your design, say bathroom pods or MEP skids, you can eliminate some fiddly on-site working that would otherwise probably cause delays. A great example that I always used was, say, MEP in risers. If you prefabricate that, drop it into place, you can use your models to check all that design works and eliminate a lot of the sometimes dangerous work, working at height, really annoying things that you don't want to be doing. And as Jonathan mentioned earlier, the use of BIM for actually operating and managing assets is an incredibly useful tool. So coming to that handover and thinking about what's called the golden thread of information, you can do that using models, and you can put all that design information together and actually have clearer information given to whoever's going to be running the facility and maintaining the asset. And we all know that the OPEX costs are bigger than the CAPEX. So actually maintaining those facilities and getting the correct information is incredibly important. So that's a summary of how BIM can be used to help avoid disputes. And I think I'm handing back to Alonso to ask us some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for enlightening us with that information. Jonathan, at the beginning, just to recap, mentioned about who can use BIM and as well what is BIM about. And now we might even jump into the legal topic. But then I would like, with this information we have now discussed, Michael, that has to do with technicalities regarding BIM itself, right? And you are a lawyer. I want to bring together the two fields, right? The legal background and BIM itself.
Yeah.
What would you, as a lawyer, need to consider when BIM is going to be applied in a construction project? Is there any legal implications arising out of that?
Yeah, thanks, Alonso. There definitely are, and Sarah did a great job of identifying the ways that BIM is supposed to, and in fact does, reduce disputes. But of course, each one of those introduces new risks. All of what BIM has to offer in some ways, and I think this is debated in the industry, people disagree, but it's a paradigm shift in theory in terms of how an asset is designed. And it introduces new interfaces and new points of risk that I think are critical to consider and think about before executing a contract and undertaking a BIM project. And Jeremy's going to talk about contract forms. I just want to identify the risks that that are introduced, and the first one comes right out of what Sarah said right at first. You know, the optimism around BIM is all about what it can do to allow parties to collaborate together, and that collaboration early in the project does create the opportunity to reduce problems down the line and avoid disputes. All of that's true, but of course it carries risks. The first and most obvious one is compatibility. The market, there are a number of different software applications, platforms on the market that all do BIM, but don't all speak to each other. And so when you enter into a contract and you're expecting your primary trades and sub-trades to join in the modeling process, you need to ensure that they've got compatible software, that they're able to use the tools that everyone else is using and everyone's speaking the same software language, for example. That, of course, leads into what's probably considered the greatest risk for trades, which is the concern that to the extent they get involved in the design process, which is not their typical role, are they at risk of providing quote unquote design services, which, in a traditional bid build model are very separate in terms of risk. And as soon as you've got your contractor and subcontractors, major trades, providing input into the design, there's a risk that they're introducing new liability to their typical work. And that's a major concern. And so you will often see provisions in BIM addendums, and I'm sure Jeremy will address them, providing that contractor participation does not constitute design services, for example, those sorts of things. So you need to make sure you guard against that. Parties need to be concerned about how the model is going to be used. As Jonathan said, and Sarah too, these models are not one size fits all, and they range from simply a digital manifestation of the asset to one with parametric information and operational information and 4D and 5D data. And so there's an open question as to who can use the model and what purpose can they use the model for? Because of course there's risk if that model is used for a purpose it wasn't intended. Because parties will only input as much data or information as they feel they need to, but to the extent someone else in the contracting group relies on it for a purpose it wasn't intended, it can create all kinds of risks. So stipulating what elements it can be used for. Can it be used for estimating or scheduling, for example? And to whom the model is going to be provided? All really important questions to address early on to deal with those risks. Along with that, setting out a protocol early on. Who's going to be responsible for the model? Who has the right to edit? Who has the control over the model? If two contractors have a clash, who's ultimately going to resolve that clash? If it can't be resolved collaboratively, is someone going to own the final decision in that regard? So having a model manager to deal with change management, clash detection and resolution, like Sarah said, all this can avoid disputes down the line, but they have to be managed properly up front, and that's critical. Access probably, I think, is one of the most important issues. And there's a case we'll talk about later perhaps, but in the old days, quote unquote, the designer or the owner would hand the contractor a set of drawings, which the contractor would take to their design trailer, and they'd go and they'd build the project. Now, with a BIM model, everything resides in the cloud. And typically on any given day, a contractor will access the cloud, check the designs that they are going to attack for the day, build their work fronts, and go build. The model manager has the power to restrict access to that model. And if they close access to the contractor, all work stops. And that can be disastrous for progress on a contract. So figuring out who gets to control access and what are the consequences of restricting access are all new risks that don't exist in a paper world necessarily. And that another risk attendant to that everyone needs to be aware of, barring a catastrophic fire that burns down the site trailer with all the design documents in it, once a contractor has the design in its hands, literally, or on a CD, there's not a whole lot of risk of losing that data. But if a model is maintained in a cloud and the internet goes down, or the data center where the model resides has a catastrophic failure, who's responsible for the lack of access in that case? Because that could have enormous implications for progress on the project if the model can't be resurrected in short order. And so these are new risks that don't currently exist on projects, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with. Is a model going down an insurable risk, like a fire would be to a contractor site trailer? So these are questions I don't necessarily have all the answers to, but parties need to start to think about ahead of time in order to get in front of them. So I want to talk about the Mott MacDonald case. We might have a chance, but I don't want to eat up too much into Jeremy's time. But Jeremy's going to tell you all about the contracts that deal with these risks, I think, and hopefully answer all of my questions that I've unfairly posed.
Exactly. So just before Jeremy jumps in, 2 comments, right? The first one, I really liked the way you foresaw the many risks, Michael, that may come up, and this is the reality, the current situation, and the future to come, right? And Jeremy, I will now ask him, right? Like as to in which projects can BIM be used, and he will reply on that. But in the meantime, if the audience has any query that would like to be addressed by the panelists of today, they might leave it in the chat and send it to us. And from here, we will try to give you a response afterwards, right? So in any event, now it's your time, Jeremy, and just in case, in which sort of construction contracts may BIM be applied? Can BIM be used in many contracts? What do you think?
I think the simple answer to that question is yes. BIM can be used in a wide range of different contracts. As Jonathan said at the outset of this talk, BIM's become more accessible. It's become cheaper. So you do see it increasingly being used in a number of contracts. But I think what you also see, and again, this has already been hinted at by everyone who's spoken before me, is it can be used in many different ways. We talk about a whole variety of different things. We talk about BIM, we talk about digital design, we talk about many different variants. Currently, at least in the UK, there's a lot of interest in digital twins, digital representations of physical assets. And what you find is that all these digital technologies, they get lumped together in a sort of general overview. It's BIM, and there's lots of other things that go with it. And I think this is something that's quite important when it comes to talk about how BIM can help avoid disputes, how the use of digital technologies can help avoid disputes, because the one area of risk is misunderstandings. There's new processes, new ways of working. Quite often there's a lack of standardized understanding. Different things mean different things to different people. And that's the type of thing that can actually lead to disputes, even when you're using the really helpful technology such as building information modeling. But certainly you do see it on a number of projects. Quite interestingly, to give one example, I'm aware of a hydropower plant in Southeast Asia. It's a FIDIC Pink Book contract, and they've introduced a BIM pilot implementation scheme. The idea is to improve the design and the construction process so the client, contractor, engineer can make collaborative, fast, accurate engineering decisions as and when to meet the needs and demands of the live construction project. But what's interesting about it is they implemented it by way of a variation mid-project, but halfway through a 4-year contract. They saw a benefit of BIM even halfway through the project. Now, because they were halfway through, they were limited in what could be done. They were mainly changing the way the design was done. They were bringing in 3D modeling. They were looking for other advances. But it's a pilot for future projects. The employer, a major employer in the country concerned, wants to introduce the advantages that BIM can offer across all brand new projects. So it's a pilot. So the next project, you might see them creating a digital twin. So they can connect it with the assets, connect with sensors, and monitor construction. And then importantly, and Sarah was talking about the operations of the building, monitor performance of the building. And you look for other reasons, why BIM is being used more. And it was interesting that Jonathan had some stats. And if you looked, I mean, I'm from the UK, so I looked very closely at what the UK stats were. And between 2010 and 2015, the use of BIM increased from about 8 to 26%. And one reason, or the reason for that, was the government support given to BIM by the then UK government. In many respects, the increase in the development of BIM in the UK was kick-started by the government about 10 years ago. They mandated the use of BIM on government and public projects, and that gave impetus, even if it was not fully achieved. The government wants to implement a strategy to change the dynamics and behaviour of the construction supply chain. They're looking for more efficient, collaborative ways of working, and they still do that today. We have in the UK a construction playbook, most recently updated in September 2022. It's a government guidance document outlining the government's expectations of how contracting authorities, suppliers, supply chain subcontractors should engage with one another in the procurement process. And that's all about using the UK BIM framework. And they want to standardise the approach, absolutely key and critical when we're using building information modelling. You want to develop a standardised approach. And they talk about generating and classifying data. They talk about data security. They talk about data exchange. And then they talk about the information management framework. So again, there's government support for the public projects, which is pushing the development and use of building information modelling. And if you look at the sort of standard forms of contracts, take a couple of examples. There's the NEC form of contract. It's an engineering contract used quite widely in the UK, South Africa, Hong Kong, Peru, and slowly expanding globally. That contract has a secondary option, an option X10, which has been developed specifically to support the use of BIM in that contract. So it's got additional contract clauses. It talks about some of the issues that Michael was highlighting, liability of errors, management of the information interfaces, who's doing what and when. And it's also got a practice note which explains how you can work with an international standard, 19650, which is a very important development in the use of BIM, particularly when we're looking to standardized terms, standardized ways of working, so that everyone, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Japan, everyone understands the same terms. Absolutely crucial. So we've got this international standard, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more. FIDIC, another form of contract, used globally, 160 odd countries, not so much in the USA, not so much in the UK. FIDIC has identified key risk areas for a BIM-enabled project: misunderstanding of scope of services, mixed data use, ineffective understanding of information, cyber security. They recognise the importance of deliverables, understanding who does what when. They recognise the importance of a contractual document, a protocol, to clearly define that. But what FIDIC haven't done is they haven't produced a FIDIC protocol. They recognise that there's a wide variety of projects, wide variety of users, wide variety of understanding of BIM. And so they rely on the parties to produce a protocol that specifically fits the contract. I think that's a really key, important thing. If I was going to say just one thing, no matter what contract, protocol, guidance notes are required on a project, you need to understand your obligations, liabilities. You need to understand the limitations within the contract documents. We talked about optimism earlier. Much more important than focusing on the technology aspect of BIM from a contractual legal point of view. And it's exciting, all the exciting things you can do. Particularly sometimes you need to rein in employers and owners because they can see all the benefits of BIM. But you've got to make sure your contract documents align with each other. You need to avoid ambiguity. With BIM, the devil really is in the contractual detail. Make sure everyone understands your obligations clearly, whether you're using NEC, FIDIC, AIA, a bespoke form of contract. That's the best way to avoid disputes. Misunderstandings raise the risk of disputes. Be as clear as you possibly can.
Thank you, Jeremy. I pretty much like the last sentence, right? The devil is in the construction detail, right? And I'm happy to hear that, right? Then we're aware of that. And actually, I've got a comment that I wanted to share with you, that's coming from Tom Johnson, who said, it seems to me the area of changes, a part of every construction project, could be very problematic. I think we all agree. And within this webinar later on, we will be discussing on challenges to come up, right? So I think, Tom, later you will hear something else on that regard. But if you have any specific questions, address it to us. But Once Jeremy and Michael, they have explained some of the legal intricacies we might consider, from risks up to the question that, yes, BIM might be used in different contracts, right? But we have to pay attention to the detail, and we also have to be optimistic, right? But let's bring it to another level. Particularly, Michael, question for you, to construction arbitration. How can we use BIM in construction disputes? Maybe in a hearing, maybe in a proceeding, any idea? And if you can relate that question to how is the current situation or application of BIM in the US or Canada, if you have any experience on that, and you can just provide us a response.
Sure, thanks, Alonso. So Sarah touched on some of the post-construction applications of BIM and all it has to offer for operations and maintenance teams, but of course, it also has an application post-construction in terms of the disputes that may arise. And I can tell you, as a construction lawyer, it's really an exciting tool. It's a very exciting tool that can be used in arbitration hearings for a couple of perhaps obvious applications, but really powerful ones. In the same way that the model creates a virtual environment to help the designer and the contractor visualize the design and the owner visualize the design and understand the practical implications of different constructability choices, all of that is true too in the context of an arbitration. As a lawyer, when you're in a hearing, your job is to tell a story and to explain a very complex thing to a decision maker. Construction is extremely complex. And what BIM does is it offers the opportunity to take very complex concepts and ideas and create a visualization of it, which for a decision maker is extremely powerful. And as a lawyer is very exciting because it creates a lot of opportunities. So for example, if you've got a 4D model, your construction model is tied to the schedule, you can literally zoom into a point of time and you can show the exact digital representation of where the construction was at that time and place. You can see the structural steel has been installed, but the cladding is only halfway complete in an as-built model. And that brings to life for the decision maker the actual project at the time in a way that looking at bar charts just can't. And so from an explanatory perspective, it's just a tremendous tool to explain a project and how a project was built and why a project could not be built properly to a decision maker. Sequencing, describing changes in sequencing in a schedule case, in a delay case or a disruption case is just so much easier, so much different when you've got a model available to you. Of course, there's evidentiary concerns, right? There's always, people ask the question all the time, well, are you using the model that was used on the project, or are you using BIM to create a model representation of how things were built for projects, for example, that did not necessarily use BIM? And the short answer is it's not all that different than the schedules we deal with today. Experts like Jonathan are in the business of looking at as planned and as built models and being forced to make decisions about perhaps correcting certain logic or sequences, looking at various updates, considering the quality of those updates. All of that is still true of BIM. And there will be some changes made to it. And the caution, of course, to every expert is those changes need to be made judiciously and carefully. And for lawyers, you need to have your ears perked up anytime the model is being changed, because it's an area of cross-examination. But if the model is maintained on a monthly basis on a project, as I said, it creates the opportunity to visualize at any given point in time exactly where the project was. In a disruption case, the other terrific opportunity available with BIM is simulating different scenarios to validate but-for arguments. In a way that's visual, in a way that can be understood by a decision maker. Again, it's one thing to look at bar charts. It's much different to pull a timeline and watch an asset get built digitally in front of you. And with a few tweaks by an experienced expert or consultant, a change can be made digitally to show what might have happened but for a change. And that's extremely powerful in the context of explaining, but also cross-examining an expert. Lawyers, educated lawyers who've been trained on the model, can use the model to cross-examine an expert and challenge them on the assumptions they make in their delay analysis, for example, on sequencing assumptions. And that's a huge boon to lawyers who've been trained and who have facility with the tool. Again, it's not necessarily a different approach to how you might conduct your cross-examination of a delay expert, but it's a new tool that's available to you to make it easier, more visual, and more understandable. Everyone knows how dry crossing a technical delay expert is on Primavera schedules. That isn't the case when you're using a 4D model. It's exciting. You're watching a digital representation of the building get built, and it changes the dynamic of the hearing. It engages the listener and the audience, and quite frankly, it makes it much more difficult, in my view, for the delay expert to hide behind the bar charts and the logic on paper that doesn't necessarily jump off for everyone else. And so I think, from my perspective, the use of BIM in disputes, certainly from a delay and disruption case, are huge opportunities. But, you know, of course, for the reasons Sarah pointed out earlier, in terms of why disputes should be avoided through clash detection early on and issues in terms of constructability, if those do slip through the cracks, the model becomes a terrific tool to visualize those clashes. And because the model has memory and can see when updates were made, you can go back into that model history, its development history, to see exactly where a change took place. You can see exactly who made a change. And so again, the possibilities for cross-examination, for investigation into design disputes is, again, no different than what we do today as lawyers, but perhaps easier, and with access to different kinds of evidence that are more readily available. So I for one, am bullish on BIM in disputes and the opportunities it creates for us.
Thanks, Michael. I guess, because I want to wrap up all the legal sort of queries and background here, and Jeremy, I guess you might agree with the use that a lawyer might have of BIM within a proceeding, arbitration proceeding. So I don't want to repeat you about that. And I guess that you might have a different view in terms of the UK and the EU. You mentioned before that you had a case in Southeast Asia, a project, right? Just as a quick comment or answer you might provide us with.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm all for the use of models. My first job when I joined Fenwick Elliott was to support one of our senior partners going off to a hearing. My job was to carry a bag of sand and some Tonka toy models because they were going to demonstrate moving spoil from one part of the road to another using toys. It was very successful, but it took a lot to set up, and you could do it much more effectively with models, provided the information that goes into the models is accurate. And that's always the risk, and that's something that Michael very rightly mentioned. But yes, I mean, overall, UK, EU, there's a greater use of a greater use of BIM and all the digital technologies. I think maybe the changes in how and where we work caused by the pandemic has led to an acceleration of the adoption of digital technologies. I mean, there are lots of reasons, but very briefly, very quickly, two other drivers that are increasing the use of digital technologies: sustainability, innovation from the construction industry, which is driving change. There's a tower in the City of London, the walkie-talkie. It looks fantastic, but it's built at an angle. And it turned out the angle it had been designed on, the sun bounced off the building and then burnt very, very expensive cars that were parked in London. If you can afford to park in London, you have to have an expensive car. But if you'd had a model and you'd assessed the solar performance at an early stage, you would have caught it. You could equally have made better sustainable design decisions if you're looking at building massing and building height profiles. Sustainability and lots of technical innovation goes hand in hand with building information modelling, and also building safety. Sarah mentioned the idea of the golden thread. There have been a number of terrible fires in buildings of height. In the UK, there was the Grenfell fire. And as a result of that, there are lots of changes being brought into legislation about improving building safety. They're all hand in hand with working with digital technology, working with building information modelling, through the use of the golden thread of information, sets up standards and protocols to enable secure data to be able to track the construction of a building. So there's lots of ways that BIM is being used, and being used imaginatively and increasingly so across the UK and the EU.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. So I think up to now, we have wrapped up the legal related comments, and I'm shifting, and I'm looking now at my colleagues, especially you, Sarah, because I want you to, I'm gonna give it to you in a broad term, right? To talk about challenges that you see, advantages that you see from your expert opinion, and if you can relate those, right, with the disputes context, even better for us and for the audience, right, Sarah? So please enlighten us again.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is BIM can be incredibly useful in disputes. So when I'm appointed as an expert, or one of my colleagues is, and we're given models, they can act as this incredible trail of breadcrumbs that allows us to perform forensic analysis in a much better way than, say, looking at drawings would. So a common example of a cause of construction disputes is change and design change and scope change. So say, for example, in this image, hopefully if you can see my screen, you can see two different revisions of a design. And as experts, we can then look at those different design revisions, compare them, and think about causation and perennial issues of delay, cost impacts, safety impacts, environmental. As Jeremy said, the models potentially could make you think about whether a matter was reasonably foreseeable at certain points in time. So looking at models, you can think about the design and the impacts of any design changes. And same again here, this is another example of a design change. So looking at two different revisions and looking at what's been added between those different revisions. And it's not just about the geometry. As we said in the start of this presentation, models can give you the physical and functional characteristics of a facility, and you can use BIM on all types of projects. So this is an example from a process engineering project. So I'm not an oil and gas or chemical engineer specialist, but if you give me a model, and if that model has information about the, say, the pipelines and what they're carrying, what they're doing, I can usually deconstruct the design and think about, okay, well, how does this work? And working with a process engineer or a chemical engineer, I can then look at the design changes of the relevant vessels, the relevant pipelines to the dispute, and we can think about, how does this impact the claim? How does this impact what the lawyers are saying and what, say, witness statements say? And exactly as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the geometrical, it can be, say, the performance, it can be, say, in this instance, what the pipeline's carrying or the material. Earlier, we mentioned clash detection and coordination, and here's one of my favorite examples. So all of the images I've created for this presentation, they're fictitious, but actually they're based on real life examples. So say here, this is, you can see there's an opening for this pipe, but it still doesn't go through. And whilst it doesn't say that one party is, their behavior is unreasonable, it doesn't say whether it falls below the standard of care. None of these models or softwares tell you that. You can't just click a button and see if something's designed with reasonable skill and care. But if you're working with competent professionals who can think about the impacts of these changes and think about the design coordination and the level of development of the models, then you can write a much better claim. And ultimately, and I think Jonathan alluded to this earlier, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So the visuals of this are really important. So when Michael was saying that Primavera could be incredibly dry, it can. Give your tribunal or give your judges something to look at, and especially for non-technical audiences. I know America has a lot more jury trials. Give them something visual and they will thank you for it. And finally, talking about cost. So my life at the moment is looking at costs in models. So here's a pre-change and post-change model looking specifically at pipelines. And using the pre-change, we can assess, okay, how much was included in the pre-change, how much was included after a change. And you can give that to the lawyers and they can think about how they want to write claims, and it gives you that that evidence. So you can use it as a shield or a sword, depending on your position. And as an expert, you can just use it to give your clients some factual contemporaneous evidence. And I think that's it for my examples, Alonso.
More than fine, Sarah. Happy that you have shared those images, because if I may tell the audience, now if you visualize what Michael and Jeremy were telling you all before, how useful this is, I fully agree, because you can easily in one shot explain or show which is the defect, right? So that's one of the major advantages of BIM in this sort of arbitration disputes, right? But now, as we are heading towards the end of our webinar of today, we have talked sort of at the beginning about the history of BIM, of the past, of the present, the different scenarios that we do see, the risks we might think of, the challenges that it might bring, because it's not always easy to apply or discuss about BIM in a construction project. But what about in the future? What is coming up? So, Jonathan, that's the last question of this webinar today. In your opinion, which might be the future of BIM in construction arbitration?
Oh, sure. I think it's a really important thing to think about, and really it is just with anything digital, it's wherever your imagination can take you, I think. And so there's a lot of different options, and I think in general I would start with, I think the positive aspects strongly outweigh any of the challenges. I mean, with any new technology, with any new design aspect or something that may be able to be used to, I'll say, burn somebody. If a contractor gets burned or a subcontractor gets burned because the owner pulled out the model and said, no, this is your fault, then of course on the next one, the contractor is not going to want to use it, or the subcontractor is not going to want to use it. And I think those are mostly going to be, continue to be rare. I think, generally the data indicates that BIM helps prevent disputes and helps prevent claims. And so a lot of people on this call or on this webinar may be cringing a little bit. I think all of our jobs are still safe, but in general, I think that that positive trend will continue. I think, to me, some of the exciting things to think about are how this might be paired with other, digitalization in the engineering construction world. One of the boards that I sit on is for a building construction school at a local university, and a lot of the studies being done right now are with virtual reality. And so I'm thinking about, if you can pair virtual reality with a model, then you can put on a pair of these goggles and you can have a project team or an owner or a contractor walk through their future building and say, I don't like that. Is this too low? Is this in the way? Those sorts of things might be influencing the design aspect. But then during construction and execution, could you employ that same concept? And if you have a particularly complex aspect of a project where multiple trades need to be working, very close coordination. You could actually have 2 or 3 of these folks in a virtual room and virtually construct this piece in a virtual setting before they actually go out and do it in the field. One more would be, and this may be down the road, but Michael and Jeremy and Sarah, everyone's talked about just the powerful tool this can be in an arbitration setting. Are we going to get to the point where we're going to have arbitrators putting on a virtual headset and you're going to have an expert or an attorney, doing an opening presentation or doing a direct presentation in a virtual reality setting where, I'm walking through the model and I'm saying, you can see, this building or this component was supposed to be installed, but it wasn't installed until 3 weeks later. And that's the basis for my delay opinion. And you have, these arbitrators that are walking around in a virtual setting, looking at these buildings as if they were there when these things were happening. So I really think, like I said, like where I started, imagination really rules the day with where this could go and where it could be partnered with other emerging technologies to take us into the future.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your comments on that. If I might add something, I think someone pronounced this word before, collaborative. I find it useful because I think BIM brings collaboration among the different parties that are involved in a construction project. And it's not that I say this, this is reflected in an NBS report, 2018. Might be interesting to have a read at it. And lately there is a lot of discussion with regards to collaboration agreements, clients, projects themselves, in order to avoid issues, because in the end, if someone has a problem, that problem is going to be affecting the others, right? So if collaboration works towards costs, that is going to be less cost, right? The project will end up sooner, and therefore everybody will be happier. Maybe it's something else, a feature that BIM may provide, right? But up to now, I think our webinar of today has ended. But before we wrap up the webinar itself, I would like to first say thank you to the panelists. They have prepared themselves for this webinar. They donated their time, and I truly appreciate that. Second, as well, appreciation towards the ICDR. And last but not least, I hope the panelists allow me to say this, that if any of the attendees would like to reach you out with any specific query, look for them on social media, and they might provide you further feedback if at some point you need it. They are the actual experts, and I'm very happy to have been able to count on them for this initiative. Thank you very much. And Rafa, if you have anything else to add, please, it's your time.
Nothing. I think you put it all very eloquently, Alonso. So again, just thank everyone to who joined for watching this webinar, and of course to all the panelists for, as you mentioned, donating their time and sharing their expertise. Thank you all very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.